France. You cannot name a pig Napoleon. The claim that you cannot name a pig Napoleon comes from France, but it is more of a cultural legal tradition and interpretation of older insult laws rather than a single modern written statute. The origin connects to France's strong legal protection of public dignity and respect toward national symbols and historical figures, especially under laws related to defamation and insult. The name Napoleon refers to Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the most important figures in French history. Because of his status, French law traditionally discourages public insult or degrading representations of national icons in a way that could be considered offensive or humiliating. So the idea developed from broader legal principles. You cannot use protected historical or public figures in a deliberately insulting or degrading context in public discourse, media, or satire that crosses legal limits of insult law. In practice, naming a pig Napoleon is not explicitly listed as a criminal offense in modern French law. Instead, it is often cited as an example of how insult laws could theoretically apply if the intent is clearly defamatory or disrespectful in a public or published context. French law has historically included strong protections against outrage toward public officials and symbols, though modern interpretations are more limited and focused on defamation, hate speech, and public insult. So enforcement is not about animals or naming pets specifically. It is about preventing intentional public humiliation of historically significant figures through language that could be considered insulting under French legal standards. Being drunk inside a bar is illegal. Alaska. The idea that being drunk inside a bar is illegal in Alaska comes from Alaska alcohol control laws, especially rules designed around public safety and liability in licensed establishments. The confusion comes from how the law is written and enforced, not from a simple "you can't be drunk in a bar" rule. In Alaska, bars operate under strict licensing rules. These laws were created because alcohol-related violence, accidents, and public disturbances were historically a serious issue in remote and high-risk communities. So, instead of banning alcohol consumption, the system focuses on preventing over-intoxication and disorderly behavior. Technically, it is illegal for an establishment to serve alcohol to a visibly intoxicated person. That means once a person is clearly drunk, the bartender is legally required to stop serving them. If the bar continues serving anyway, the business, not just the customer, can face penalties, fines, or even loss of license. Wearing armour inside. UK Parliament. The law that makes it illegal to wear armour inside Parliament comes from a very old statute called the Statute Forbidding Bearing of Armour, passed in 1313 during the reign of King Edward II. At that time, English politics was extremely violent. Nobles didn't just argue in Parliament, they often arrived with armed soldiers to intimidate opponents or force political decisions. In fact, armed groups had already marched into London during earlier political conflicts, and Parliament sessions were becoming dangerous confrontations instead of debates. To stop this, Edward II introduced a strict rule. Anyone attending Parliament must come without force and without armour. The idea was simple. Parliament should be a place of discussion, not intimidation. Under medieval law, armour meant full protective battle gear like helmets, chainmail or plate armour. Wearing it inside Parliament was treated as a direct sign of potential violence or rebellion. So the rule wasn't about clothing fashion, it was about preventing armed pressure inside government. Even though society completely changed over the centuries, the law was never formally removed. Chewing gum ban in Singapore. The restriction on chewing gum in Singapore comes from a major policy shift introduced in 1992 under the government of Singapore, led by Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. Before the ban, chewing gum was widely sold and commonly used in public spaces. But over time it started creating serious public problems, especially in a highly regulated and clean city environment. The biggest issue was not chewing gum itself, but how it was being misused. People began sticking gum on elevator buttons, door sensors, public seats, and especially on mass transit systems like train doors and platforms. This caused expensive damage and frequent malfunctions. In some cases, train doors failed to close properly due to gum blocking the sensors, disrupting transport services. Cleaning gum off public infrastructure was also extremely costly and time-consuming. Singapore was investing heavily in maintaining a clean city reputation, and gum litter became a direct obstacle to that goal. So in 1992, the government made a strict decision. The import and sale of chewing gum were banned entirely, except for limited medical or dental use. Australia. It's illegal to dress like Batman in public. The claim that it is illegal to dress like Batman in Australia comes from a mix of real public safety laws under Australia, but it is not a literal nationwide law banning superhero costumes. Instead, it connects to laws around public disguise, face covering, and intent to conceal identity. In many Australian states, there are regulations under Public Order or Summary Offences Acts that make it illegal to wear a face covering in certain contexts with intent to conceal identity, especially during suspicious activity, protests, or potential criminal situations. These laws were introduced mainly to help police identification. The idea is simple. If someone is committing an offence or behaving suspiciously, covering the face makes investigation harder and increases risk. Now, Batman-style costumes sometimes include masks or full face coverings. So in specific situations, like entering restricted areas, public demonstrations, or trying to conceal identity in a suspicious context, police could treat it as problematic under those disguise-related provisions. All swans belong to the Crown, United Kingdom. The rule that unmarked swans belong to the monarch comes from medieval English law under United Kingdom, specifically tied to royal property rights over valuable wildlife. Back in the Middle Ages, swans were considered a luxury food item. They were rare, expensive, and often served at royal feasts. Because of their value, ownership of swans was strictly controlled to prevent theft and unauthorized harvesting. Over time, this control became formalized into law. The Crown claimed ownership of all unmarked mute swans on certain stretches of public waterways, especially major rivers. Unmarked means swans that don't carry a private ownership ring or identification mark. To manage this system, special officials were appointed. Historically, these roles included the swan marker and swan warden, who would travel along rivers, identify swans, and mark those owned by private estates or permitted institutions. Each year, there is still a traditional ceremony called swan upping, where officials count swans on the River Thames. The rule is a surviving piece of medieval royal law that has evolved into a ceremonial and conservation tradition rather than a practical restriction on everyday life. Colorado Dandelion Height, Pueblo, USA. The rule about dandelions in Pueblo, Colorado comes from local nuisance vegetation and weed control ordinances, not a famous Wierd law created for fun. In many US cities, including Pueblo, local governments enforce property maintenance codes that require homeowners to keep weeds and grass below a certain height, usually around 6 to 10 inches, depending on the exact ordinance. Dandelions become part of this rule because they are classified as invasive weeds in many municipal codes. The concern is not the flower itself, but what happens when it is left unmanaged. If dandelions grow freely, they spread extremely fast. Their seeds travel long distances through wind, quickly invading neighboring lawns, sidewalks, and public spaces. This can create complaints between neighbors and increase maintenance costs for the city. If vegetation exceeds the allowed height or is considered uncontrolled weed growth, the property owner can receive a warning or citation. Thailand. Stepping on money is illegal. The idea that stepping on money is illegal in Thailand comes from real cultural law connected to respect for the monarchy and national symbols, but it is often oversimplified online. Thai currency, the baht, contains images of the king, especially historical and current royal figures. In Thailand, the monarchy is deeply respected, and insulting or showing disrespect toward royal symbols is taken very seriously under strict lèse-majesté principles. Because of this, stepping on money can be interpreted as disrespecting the image of the king printed on it, even if the act is not intended as political disrespect. Historically, Thailand has strict laws that protect the dignity of the monarchy. These laws are enforced to prevent public insult, defamation, or symbolic disrespect toward royal authority. Since currency carries royal imagery, it becomes part of that protected symbolic system.